Can we have a conversation about Bridgerton yet? Like, did you watch? Did you see the things? Part of the reason that we are about to have this conversation is because my husband is finally caught up. And because he watches many of these videos, I couldn't go outside spoiling things, not in advance. But now that he's caught up, that means that we can catch up. We can have a conversation. Just so we're clear, full spoilers ahead. I'm keeping no secrets. I'm keeping nothing to myself. And we are talking about the season of Benedict Bridgerton right after the intro. And welcome back to another episode of the Daily Donna with me, your host, Dr. Donna. And we are talking about Bridgerton, this Benedict Cinderella-esque sort of season. That's the one that we're going to be talking about. And for those of you who don't know, every now and then I like to do one of those things that I call is like, it's not that deep, where we're really just talking about something that really is not that deep, but that we can still probably learn something from. And the it's not that deep this time around is Bridgerton, because I did watch it. I finished it a couple of weeks ago when I was out there in Mexico. And it was on that trip, we were watching it together. It's a completely different watching experience when you watch it with other people and everybody got that good, funny ass commentary. It's like watching movies at the Black Theater instead of the extra quiet white one. It's a completely different experience. Meanwhile, this Bridgerton season, I felt like the theme was grief. And if you also feel like it was grief, go ahead and tell me in the comments whether or not you think it was grief. And I'm going to do a rundown. But I thought we should first start with Kübler-Ross. Now, Kübler-Ross is I believe since deceased, but was a researcher, psychologist, something, who gave us the 5 stages of death and dying, which eventually got changed over into the change curve because grief exists at the intersection where there has also been change in one's life. Because it is the letting go and the grieving of what was and maybe what you thought would come from there, where you would go with that to this new thing, which is really what any level or stage of sort of death and dying is about, the loss of it, the loss of that version of the future, the loss of what have you. We're going to get into that, but with Bridgerton. So the 5 stages of death and dying, the original 5 stages were denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Had to learn that thing for my test at Morgan State. I'm happy that it sort of stuck around, but I still needed to write it down for this one. So you got your 5 stages, but I also want to talk about what was the line that made me even start thinking about grief specifically in Bridgerton. Now, I was sitting with my husband. He was finishing his first watch, which was technically my rewatch. And it was a line after, I told y'all spoilers, right? Because the spoilers coming now. After John Kilmartin had kicked the bucket, where him and Francesca are sitting at the piano, and she says to him, "You do not give yourself enough credit, Benedict." And I was just like, woo, wow, right? But also, who does? Who gives Benedict credit? Why would Benedict be practiced in giving himself credit that nobody else gives him? So that got me thinking. And then the next couple, like not like the next scene-ish or something, we are at Lady Penwood's. And she's talking to her youngest, and it's just like, "I vented my frustration on you." And she responds, "Yes, I've grown used to it." Good God, right? It's the hello, whatever it is that you thought you were hiding in your really piss poor behavior to your kid was not as hidden as well as you may have thought it was. And I think you saw her rear back a little bit. Like, it's almost like she did not expect that answer from her kid, whose name I cannot recall, but hopefully I could put some pictures or something. But let's talk about the real grief problem that I seen in Bridgerton was one around perfection. Now, if you have watched some of the other videos, then you know that I think of perfection as nothing more than fancy anxiety. And the grief of perfection is so stifling in this particular season that it leaves no room for anything other than grief. So first you have, let's start with Mrs. Penwood, or Lady Penwood. Um, she's got her two kids. She sort of raised Sophie, and was dealing with grief twice over. I would even say maybe more than twice over. So first, her first husband, the husband of her two children, they died. He died. And then she was back on the marriage mart, and she felt the need to be perfect in order to get a new match. And she said that, and to get a love match at that was quite unexpected. But then getting saddled with Sophie. And I was just like, ooh, right there, let's pause. We are supposed to see sort of like the perfection of how they live life, usually in comparison to the Bridgertons, and seeing how often a love match doesn't even happen while they still have to put on the facade of not the facade of perfection, right? Like, I think the first time that we really get into that is probably like, if you saw Queen Charlotte, then it's with Lady Danbury. We know that she didn't particularly love her husband. She kind of cursed this man's name just a little bit, right? So she's one of the first that we see did not having a love match, but rather just being matched, and still having to sort of show a societal fronting or masking of perfection for anybody else that would come in contact with them, the same way that I assumed that Lady Penwood had to do. And then to for her second joint to be a love match, and she's basking in what feels like the perfection of that, only to find out that this man got a kid. Which is, I think, hilarious, because she's talking about the pressure and perfection that she already felt that she needed to display on her own because she had two kids and she was spoiled goods or damaged goods, but didn't want to give, I guess, like, to extend the grace to the product of the man that she said she loved. Which also brings me to this question: how much can you love a man? How much can you love anybody if you can't even love part of what they produce, when you don't even want it to exist? And how do you honor a love and dishonor their child? I don't know. Questions for another day, right? But so that's Lady Penwood. Let's go into Sophie. Well, Sophie, she's wearing her mother's necklace. She's already feeling, in many ways, betrayed by her father. So I think that her life is a display of how perfect almost doesn't exist, but she feels almost like she is the product of people's imperfect decisions, right? She is her mom was a maid. Her dad was, he was of society, having a dalliance with a maid, and she is the kept result of that coupling. Yeah, I know I'm using those good words, that coupling. Um, but she wore her mother's necklace, and I like the part where she was able to own up that it wasn't just about keeping her mother's memory alive, that it actually turned into a way to remind herself the consequences of not being perfect in maintaining her station. That if she could maintain that she is a maid, if she could maintain her place and not aspire for more, not want more, and certainly not pursue more, then she could stop herself from having another byproduct who would have to live the life similar to the one that she lived, because she is a maid, and she didn't want them to experience the love of a Lord Father and then really be denied any of the things, any of the benefits that would come with having a Lord as your deity. So it was a reminder of her to be perfect. Benedict, I think of him as mourning his own lack of perfection through that line that Francesca sort of not admonishes him, but calls him in on, that, like, you don't give yourself enough credit. And I'm thinking that I felt like this season, he mostly kind of explored the ways that he wasn't Anthony. He explored the ways that he wasn't what he maybe perceived as being perfect, the perfect son, the perfect brother. And even his fumbling about with Sophie, with asking homegirl to be his mistress, which was wild behavior. Trying to do it perfectly, right? Like trying to find the perfect balance between having the object of his affections, of being able to expend his love, his care, his desire in this area, while also meeting propriety and doing that piece. And then there was the mourning of Sophie that was also happening, right? But also mourning of the lady in silver, right? This person that he felt this immediate connection with, and then didn't have a name, didn't have anything to go by, and just she disappeared and also didn't answer his call for connection. But then he meets Sophie, and he decides to let go of the lady in silver, despite the fact that we know we are in on the secret, baby. They are the same person. But he don't know that. And it's watching this other piece of mourning from him, the letting go of one, the acceptance of the other, and then his rejection of him. Which, I mean, low key, high key, I think that we would be remiss if if I didn't also say that some of that could also be pride and ego, because it's kind of like this maid is rejecting me, which is wild, which I think would further add to the narrative that he would have about not being perfect, about not being desirable, about not being good enough. Um, we're moving on to Francesca Kilmartin, nee Bridgerton. She is mourning John. She is mourning the future. She's also mourning her lack of perfection at performance of proper wifedom, right? She couldn't reach her peak. She was also unable to give him a child, which she also, I think, affiliates to her inability to have reached her peak. And this lacking of perfection, it means that she is coming down hard on herself, right? And even trying to find the perfect way to mourn, the perfect way to do a funeral, the perfect way to be with other people, and what would have been a perfect closing out of his death with her faking a pregnancy. Cause I don't know about you, but I didn't believe her when she said that she ain't had no period. I ain't believe her when she said that she was pregnant initially, especially given when they said that, like, hey, we're gonna have to go and test that, check that. And then she was just like, oh no, right? And all of that for me, those were like flags. And then the final, or one of the final ones that I want to talk about as far as like this morning piece goes, would be Mrs. Bridgerton, Mama Bridgerton. And for her, it's the remourning of her husband through the her daughter's loss of husband, right? So like she is back in her mind about Mr. Bridgerton and what she lost with him and that love match and all that. I think, yes, there's also a mourning for the pain that her daughter is going through. Um, but I think what really woke up in her was the mourning of the loss of herself, and being, I think, called in pretty beautifully by Benedict about how it's been love, love, love is the most important, love is the most important. But the unstated was that it was love within the bounds of society and what society would accept as love, or as good, redeemable, quality love. Um, and just sort of the mourning of the version of her who would have said love over everything and meant that with her whole chest, and recognizing that somewhere along the way she lost that carefree version of her who wanted to buck the system and do the daggone thing, and became Mrs. Bridgerton and found a way to have love within the bounds that society gives. Which brings me to the ultimate caged bird here, Queen Charlotte, who is mourning Lady Danbury even before she's left, right? Like she's mourning what will be, how she'll feel that emptiness. I mean, not to mention that, there's also, I mean, at this point, the one that she knows to be our writer. Oh my gosh, I cannot remember her name. Lady Whistledown. For those of you who don't know, my husband's behind the computer. It helps me make sure I feel like I'm talking to a person. So he provided me with Whistledown. Queen Charlotte is mourning the loss of Lady Whistledown, but also is having anticipatory grief around the loss of Lady Danbury. Now, I'm gonna pause here. Anticipatory grief basically means it's the grief that you do in advance of something happening when you know that that thing is imminent. It also does not mean that the grief won't still be heavy once the thing actually comes to pass. Anticipatory grief, some people would mark it basically as you suffering twice. You suffered before the thing, but you also suffer at and after the thing. That is not to say it doesn't serve a purpose or a point. I don't know what purpose or point it serves because my specialty has not necessarily been in grief, but anticipatory grief is what it's called. But Queen Charlotte, not only is she mourning the loss of Lady Whistledown and Lady Danbury, she's also mourning her husband, right? And the loss of that connection and that relationship, which we know if you watch Queen Charlotte. So I guess spoiler alert for something that you should have already watched and really it's your fault. So she's mourning very life itself. And then I'm just like, well, what was the connective tissue here? Yes, all of them are having loss, but all of them are having loss that is based on perfection that society has given them, which is probably one of the saddest things to see. That the ton requires perfection. And because the ton requires perfection, it also requires them to be in a space of grieving from the losses of the life that they would actually have wanted and maybe the ones that they would have actually lived. Benedict can't be with who he wants to without lies because the ton demands something else. Mrs. Bridgerton, maybe she would have still been with Mr. Bridgerton, but she lost a piece of who she was because it was required for her to show propriety. I mean, Sophie had lost because she knows what society would have demanded of her and demanded of a child that would be produced by her if she were to be with Benedict and they were living in any version of the truth, but also what Benedict would have lost or what he would have lost his family by marrying beneath his station. Basically, the biggest sort of giver of loss here is the rules of propriety of the ton, which means that the only people who actually have freedom are not the people with the money and the titles. You're moneyed, you're titled, and you are shackled to this idea of what you're supposed to be in order for you to maintain money and titles. Really, for this thing to maintain itself, and this comes back to a question of power for me, right? So, conversations around power, particularly when I'm talking about it from a racial standpoint, it's like who has power? In what ways is power being used to sort of keep itself? And I'm just like, well, look at it. Who has power? The ton, right? Like this elusive societal separation, this thing. Who is maintaining it? Everybody is maintaining it. Why are they maintaining it? For money and titles. They're maintaining it for money and titles, which means that they give up other things, which means the thing that they're giving up is their humanity. Because perfection is, when a person is performing perfection, they're not performing humanity. You cannot be a human and perform perfection. Performing perfection belies your humanity because you become a human doing, because you cannot be a human being. When you are performing, when you're doing the dance of perfection, it requires you to let go of things for yourself, but also to snatch it from others. Because when I have to be perfect, so do you. If I have to be perfect, you can't have things. The queen has to be perfect. She can't have things. You can't have things. They have to be perfect. They can't have things. You can't have. It's a circle with no end. There is constantly going to be a snatching of pieces. And when we are trying to find that way of being and not just maintaining the facade that perfection demands, gosh, that's where the story is. Sophie messed up. She wasn't perfect in her execution to not fall for somebody above her station. Benedict was not perfect. And I mean, his is lifelong lack of perfection. But he learns to, I think, appreciate himself by seeing himself through Sophie's eyes and then being reconfirmed through Francesca's grief. It's it's amazing the ways that they find themselves back in their humanity and how all parties involved recognize society as the thing that is removing them from happiness, from imperfect happiness, and how they all thus lie, bend the rules, twist it just a little bit in order to have some level of happiness. And I guess my question to you is, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do tomorrow so that you can maybe not perform perfection, but have some happiness, to have some peace, to have some connection, to have something more? Lady Kilmartin almost, like, she was so interested in doing it perfectly, it being perfect in her grief, that she almost forgot her husband's life, that she was willing to also give up of herself, that she was pushing people away. That leads to an abject type of loneliness, right? Alone is a physical state of being. Loneliness is mental. It is perceived distance between yourself and others. And she was perceiving distance because she was partly creating it. And it makes me wonder, how much distance are you creating between you and other people, partially because of the shame that you are not perfect. Shame is different from guilt. Guilt, I did something wrong. Shame, something is wrong with me. When we are needing to perform perfection, sometimes what we're also, like, I'm just going to say the quiet part out loud. You're saying that something is wrong with you that requires you to perform. You're saying there's something about you that demands the performance so that you can be in the presence of others, so that you can be in the ton. And I'm wondering, who shaped the rules of the society that you're trying to pretend you belong to? And what is it costing you? Because for these people, it all cost them something. Lady Penwood, it cost her her humanity. And in so doing, cost Sophie hers, right? Like, Sophie wasn't allowed to be her father's daughter because of Lady Penwood, who could not even imagine having this, like, bastardish child be raised with her kids, right? Began the separation of making her both alone and lonely in a home that she'd grown to know as her own, with a man that she'd also known as her father, that she was now calling sir. It just, and it cost Lady Penwood the relationship with both of her daughters. One that she doted on to the point of making that girl into a monster, who then also didn't know her own worth, her own value, her own anything outside of how much money she was willing to double up on in order to buy her a husband. And then the other one who's just like, well, I expect you to be a jackass to me because you have always been a jackass to me. And it's before Sophie left that you've been a jackass to me. Right? It's that's a cost of relationship, but also the relationship that she had with herself. She also is in many ways mourning the version of herself that she was before she became a jackass. That she was soft and funny and clumsy and endearing, and that she didn't see the value in those things, and that maybe that's part of what helped her get the love match in the first place. She gave the credit to her perfection and not to the soft, smiling, happy sort of treasure that she was. And I also recognize that she needed the perfection so that she can guarantee connection for her two daughters, and that they may not have gotten it because of what? The ton and the rules of their society. Because you can't be raising a lord and lady's kids next to this maid's child. That's crazy, right? Because whether or not we also want to say it, it kind of is like, the she follows the child follows the condition of the mother. The mother is not of high class. She is not titled, right? She is a maid. And because she is a maid, Sophie followed the condition of the mother. Does that shit sound familiar? The point is, I'm wondering what you give up. I'm wondering what you're grieving. I'm wondering what ways have you practiced perfection and what is the grief of your own perfection? So tell me in the comments below if you are willing to share. I recognize that I am asking quite a bit of you in this moment. I'm asking you to sort of expose, at the very least to yourself, the perfection that you are performing. And what is the loss that comes with your having to perform that perfection? Anyway, you are the bee's knees. Thank you for joining me on this It's Not That Deep episode of the Daily Donna with me, your host, Dr. Donna. And I will see you when? Tomorrow. But let me know all of your Bridgerton thoughts in the comments below. I am ready to have us a little conversation, especially now that I've officially spoiled it all. All right. Bye.